Hello and welcome back to the poddy. Today I was about to say Jacqueline, it's Charlie.
Yeah.
The reason being there are two Charlies at our gym, so we call Charlie Jack sometimes. And we are going to be talking today a little bit more on the nerdy side of training, which I'm really excited about, is training techniques, utilising different styles, like different things that are kind of, I guess, what we do in our training and what we work with closely with our clients, not necessarily majorly different styles of training, but obviously we work towards the bodybuilding style. You're competing this year.
Yes.
Which is exciting. Obviously, I am now watching everyone else compete this year, which is fantastic. But yeah, so obviously you've been PT obviously for about a year almost.
Yes.
Coming up to. So how long have you been training for, and how did you sort of find your sort of like style that you wanted to push for in the bodybuilding way, I guess?
So
to start off with,
I've been training for about 10 years now. So I started when I was 17.
I wish I started really young.
And it literally just started because all my mates were going and I was like, they're getting jacked, I want to be jacked.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's how it all started. And as time progressed, I just fell in love with it a little bit more and more.
Did they stay in love with it, or
some of them sort of stayed with it, but a lot of them sort of dropped off.
Yeah.
But I just kept going because I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I've tried lots of different training styles over the years. I've gone for pyramid sets, high volume. I've gone for low volume, sort of high intensity. I've done lots and lots of different.
And you kind of like also, because you want to enjoy it. But also you want to have that like fine line of putting yourself through that bit of intensity where it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
But equally you don't want to hate it.
Yes.
Yeah. That's no fun.
Absolutely.
Although I say that we do put ourselves through torture, but there we go.
Yeah, that's it. But I enjoy training really hard and intensely now, but I've learned that through a lot of trial and error of things as well. So yeah, and it is a little bit extreme, I suppose, in one sense, but it's what I enjoy doing. So to me, it doesn't really feel like hard work, although it is.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, when you enjoy the process, it's not so bad. And also because you understand that long-term like results.
Yes.
That's the best bit. And sort of when you find that like long-term gratification of results, like I think I put up a year picture on my stories yesterday, and I was like, you won't accidentally put on muscle and you won't accidentally change your composition. Like it takes so long. And I think that's like an important thing to highlight, but finding your sort of ways of training and techniques, you want to like stick with it, give it time, because then you actually find out whether you're used to it, how your body's responding from it, because you can't tell, like you won't get a response from something that it doesn't really know what consistently it's doing.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It needs to be consistent, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
just consistency. We'll just leave that in its own bubble.
That is its own thing, but that's the main principle of any sport result or whatever it is.
Anything,
is number one. And then there's lots of different principles as to how you obviously keep progressing.
Yes.
And as long as the stimulus, whatever that stimulus is, but obviously for the purposes of bodybuilding, the stimulus has to be higher over a period of time, which is progressive overload.
Ta-da! The magic. And like those words, I feel like it's thrown everywhere. Yeah. But to someone like, even as a beginner, like it's like, oh yeah, progressive overload. And then I think actually most people in their heads like, I think most people just think of it as weight, which is what we were talking about when we were discussing these topics the other day. And I guess that's probably the best place to start, because progressive overload can be, oh my gosh, like
there's lots of different ways.
Many. And like you say, it's actually, you want to be stimulating like the muscles that you're working, not just moving them. It's very different. Like, for example, I'm on a deload at the moment, which is a whole nother thing in itself, which I will go on to explaining. But, I'm not focusing on stimulating the muscle because I need to recover. So I'm literally just moving to like, you know, get a little bit of blood flow and then that's it.
Yeah.
Whereas it's very different when you're pushing to stimulate, to be uncomfortable, to push for growth, because growth takes time. I wish it was quick.
Yes,
it's not.
It takes a lot of time.
Yeah. So where would you start, I guess, with progressive overload? Obviously, yes, the weight.
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways that you can do this. So weight is obviously the easiest one to sort of remember, just adding load within your rep range over a period of time.
Yeah.
So,
and it doesn't have to be a lot.
No, just to be honest, I would always suggest small increments first. Yeah. And then if you need to do more the following week, do more the following week and just keep going on that trajectory. Because if you put on too much too soon, injury risk goes up.
Yeah.
And you might fall out of your rep range. And if you keep doing that week after week, you are going to pound your body into the ground.
And it's going to be intense and not necessarily pound your body into the ground in the best way.
No.
Like, you want to give it time and also give it time to get used to it more than anything else. Like, I always found, like, you know, add in like the little biscuits, we always call it.
The little biscuits.
Know, the little weights count. And, you know, even on like my deadlifts, it's like obviously a huge movement, you know, but you add that like 2 kilos each side, my God, do you feel it? Like, you know, it makes such a difference. Yeah. Whereas like, for example, shoulders, or if I'm doing like a front delt movement or something, like 0.25 is still going to make a huge difference. Like, it's obviously has to be relevant to obviously obviously what you're working.
Absolutely. It's subject to the muscle that you're trying to train, because the smaller muscles are going to take smaller little jumps because they're a smaller muscle, they can't produce as much force as the bigger ones. So those jumps are going to be even smaller, and the progress over time is going to be smaller. Not to say that it's not progressing at all.
But that's all we really want. It's just progression. It's not, you don't need to be jumping from here to there. Like, you know, you're jumping. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how far. And it does feel different. But, you know, compared to like, don't think, oh, you know, my upper's weaker, like compared to legs. Like generally, like you're going to get a lot more force out of your legs than your upper anyway, depending on your background, how long you've been doing it for, etc. But like, it really disturbs me when people are like, oh, my upper's so much weaker. But, you know, you can still progress in upper to make it stronger. The same, like it's almost like irrelevant to other parts of your body. Yeah,
just because the progress is slower doesn't mean that you need to sort of go with the flow and just leave it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you will get body parts that will be noticeably bigger or stronger than others.
Yeah. And also I feel like your legs are the power in your legs and your strength and sort of how they look as well, it's never going to match like my upper in the same intensity as well.
Yeah, like, but that's the way it should be, though, because there's a bigger set of muscles.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, don't ever think that, you know, one thing should, like, you know, obviously you want balance, but that's not necessarily to top to bottom.
No.
It's not literally symmetrical.
Yeah. If you're squatting the same amount that you're like dumbbell pressing over your head, I would have serious questions about that.
Yeah, I'd be scared. I'd be impressed, but, you know. And it's, so obviously, weight is a massive thing for progressive overload. Mm-hmm. But it is not the only thing.
Nope.
And in fact, it's almost sometimes almost the last thing. Like, you know, because you want to sort of see how those intensities can vary. So what would you then go for next? What not even next is another thing to add to our little list.
So other ways of progressive overload, it obviously, for one, depends on your training history for a start to then progressively get better. But you can have increased range of motion if you're not already accessing all of it to begin with.
And you want that range of motion. Like, we don't want to be half repping.
Nope.
Like, full range on everything. And I think a lot of people forget, and it's easy when you add weight and progress with that, that your range of motion goes. Like, no, it should be the same from the offset.
Yeah.
Like, and that's how you will progress.
Absolutely. I have what I call the 3 non-negotiables, which is good range of motion, full range of motion, depending on the exercise.
Yeah.
Then you have good tempo. So you have good control on the eccentric on the way down or on the way up, depending on what muscle you're using.
This means not repping it out like no tomorrow and swinging about the weights. If you're I always say to my clients, you've got to beat the weight.
Yeah, well, this is the thing.
Don't let gravity do it. Like, you're better than gravity.
Yeah, you have to own every inch of that rep to make the muscle work as hard as it possibly can in order for you to progress the muscle as much as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Because with bodybuilding, you're not training a movement, you're training a muscle.
Yes.
Which means the muscle has to be working as hard as it possibly can.
Yeah, 100%. And what's your other one?
So my other one is just general good technique. So this could be things like aligning things up properly and making sure that it's correct for the exercise. As an example, if you're doing, let's say, a bench press, I see it very often.
Bench press dumbbell
but with a barbell, arms are up here, like this. And I'm like, are you training your shoulders? Oh, no. Well, it should be down here then, shouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think people forget that, and it's always like, you want to protect your shoulders, like, and really with anything, like, for the longevity of anything, like, general, like, good form is the basis of what you need, because you don't want to damage anything, because then you can't necessarily progress for that aspect or in that way. Like, we want to protect our shoulders in bench press, whether it's dumbbell or barbell, but yeah, we don't want to put anything out of place.
No, exactly. It's just also learning how a muscle moves best. Yeah. And utilising that. And
obviously different anatomies. Everyone has. Yes. It's very different. So it can vary, which is why it's useful to have a PT. Yeah. Shameless plug. But, you know, and it's useful. Like, we can't even, like, ourselves, like, you know, we'll always get other people, like, you know, if it's to check something, or if something's not right, or if someone wants to see the outside eye of pushing it or pushing you, because you can't always see it. And that's why I guess, like, form videos are really good. Like, I know not everyone's massively comfortable, but, you know, if you can, or if you're happy to, like, have that video, sometimes even when you look back at it yourself, you even then reflect on it a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can't always have a third person view when you're yourself.
Yes.
So sometimes,
and it can feel amazing. And then you come out of it and you're like, oh my God.
And you're like, oh, I could have got a bit deeper there. And I bounced a bit there. But the whole point is that you give that honesty to yourself, so then you can make the right adjustments moving forward.
To progress.
Rather than just sort of being in what's it called?
Kind of sit a bit complacent, like
a bit complacent, and almost confirming your own bias, so to speak. Because you're a bit like, no, there's nothing wrong with it. I can feel it. It really feels good. Blah blah blah. Yeah, but it could do with a little bit of tweaking.
Yeah, and I think that's to say in any, like, I reckon every single one of us in every single training session, there's going to be at least one thing, like, that you can necessarily do better, but that's why we always go back.
Exactly. And nothing is ever perfect.
Nothing is ever perfect. And obviously it can be the best of our ability, and you can give absolute 100%, and that's obviously all you can give. Yeah. But equally, it doesn't mean to say that it's perfect and you're a master of training, or like you can do it, or, you know, be like it. That's why we progress to train, and we take our time, and we keep going back, and we want to get better, because there's always room to just be that 1% better.
Absolutely. And even if you've mastered something, there is always still something new you can learn or do or improve on. Because there is no such thing as like a 10 out of 10 exercise, workout, or whatever. It doesn't,
or perfect program, or like, and I think that's why I really struggle with someone's like, oh yes, this is the perfect program to do this. And it's like, what, how have you got to that sentence? Yeah. And I guess that leads on as well nicely to say that nothing is one size fits all.
No.
And a place that I always say that, and I get a lot of questions, is rep ranges.
Yeah.
Is probably the biggest one, I think, on that. Like, so many people are like, oh, how many reps should I do? And obviously you've got to go by like how it's feeling, like how it's moving, like, and that's why, because you have your logbook as well, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Like, swear by mine. It's like week. My Bible. And I didn't realise actually how important it was to follow it along until I sort of actually started doing it. I think I actually probably started logbooking when I started with John. And I was like, oh, this is what, but now when I don't have my logbook, I'm like, where the hell am I? Where am I? What am I doing? So yeah, rep ranges. There is no perfect rep range.
No, so
and there's so much variety within that.
Absolutely. And with growing a muscle, so hypertrophy, anywhere between 6 to 30 reps, that's your rep range for gaining muscle. As long as you're close to failure within that rep range, It doesn't matter where in it you are. The only consensus is that you're progressively getting heavier in that rep range, or you're adding more reps to a certain load in that rep range, and over time your muscle will grow.
And that's not Charlie saying you need to do 30 reps on
No.
every exercise. But, you know, and I was about to highlight as well, you know, I have some exercises which are your standard sort of like 8 to 12, like, you know, you have that. But working within a range, like I used to always be like, 3 sets of 10, the standard. And obviously, to a point blank, someone learning something new or like complete beginner, I think it can be a useful way to start somewhere, to understand a little bit more about like limits and where that we sit in that range. And that's, I guess, where it's come from everyone doing 3 sets of 10. But then obviously it really changes the game when you work within those ranges, because you, like I said on the previous pod as well, like you don't want to finish a set and be like, oh, that was easy, you know, like you want to, and then that weight's too light, or I could have controlled that a bit better. Focus on those things. 1, could you control it better? You know, 2, is your form correct? Okay, it's still too easy. Okay, it might be too light. You know, you want to be working within that, and then by the time you reach, okay, have I got comfortably like 12 reps, say, still comfortable, you know, actually on this I got 8 or 9. You know, it's using that as a guide, because then you can progress. Like 1 rep is a progression. Like the next week.
1 rep is a massive win. But the thing is, with beginners, I always suggest higher reps, because the nervous system will adapt a lot quicker than the muscles do. So from performing more reps, it's the same as riding a bike more when you're learning to ride a bike. If you want to learn how to ride it, you keep getting on.
And you kind of understand that stimulus a little bit more and more and more before you then start really challenging it.
Absolutely.
Which is a great point.
And it's like nailing the technique, so you're not creating bad habits, because it's going to be a lot harder to get out of a bad habit and keep progressing than it is to learn it correct or better, in the first place, and then be able to just keep progressing.
And the only way is up from that point. Like a lot of clients say, I used to be able to lift this. And I'm like, I don't care about that. Like, let's strip it back. I care about what you're doing from now, because from here, when it feels its best, your intensity, you're feeling like you've done a set. Like, okay, well, it's only going to feel better. It's only going to move better. It's only going to move smoother. Your reps are only going to go up. Your weights are only going to go up. So let's and don't ever be afraid to do that. And also connection, like how's it feeling? Because that's going to give you a really good idea on those ranges.
Yeah, absolutely. But I find as well that as somebody gets further on and they obviously muscles get bigger, it's a lot easier for them to just consciously contract it. So that connection, so to speak, is a lot better as opposed to when you're beginning. When you're beginning, you want to just make sure the technique's correct and get nice and strong. And then from there, everything, you'll have like your nice foundation for your house, so to speak. And then after that, then you start putting your bricks on, you start building it.
And because then it's only gonna, you're only gonna get better and better and better.
Exactly.
And I think connection is a funny one, because you can also, like I've had so many people like, you know, you can be quad dominant or hamstring dominant. Or I think the biggest one I find with clients is glute connection. Like, so many people are like, I can't feel my glutes at all. And that's sometimes when I would use being a PT is to strip back the movement, and work with those higher rep ranges. Okay, let's just get a little, like, how is it feeling? Because it's not going to be there. You know, it will come, and it's just, you know, understanding it and being persistent to push for what you want to feel out of the movement as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it just takes the most smallest tweak of an exercise for somebody to start feeling something. As an example, let's use the leg press, right?
Okay.
If somebody has their feet low on the platform, they're like, oh, I can't really feel it in my glute, I can really feel it in my quad, and that's because it's more quad dominant. Because when it's lower down, the knee is moving more than the hip. So your quad is going to take over a lot. Whereas when it's higher up on the platform, there's less movement at the knee, more at the hip. So your glute's going to be firing a lot better. And it's like, oh my God, bingo, I can feel it just by moving your foot up. Just
and you still feel it in your quads. Like, it's not going anywhere, but you know, we're just adding another sort of parts of the movement, we can feel a lot more out of it. And one thing I do want to highlight on that is I see so many videos and it's like, you know, if you put your feet here, or here, you know, one side, and you see all sorts of funky positions. It's like, you'll feel it this, and this. And it's like, generally, like, you know, if you want a more glute dominant exercise, you know, choose a more glute dominant exercise compared to like trying to fiddle around with one exercise that fits everything.
Yeah,
that obviously
one size fits all, fits no one.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. I like that. And obviously within that, talking on from Connection, you've got different types of sets. Mm-hmm. And however many sets, again, what is however many sets? That can also vary. Yeah. And how many sets you do, and depending on how big the muscle group is. And it's a minefield to understand that. And obviously warm-up sets as well. Like, where would you go? How would you sort of look at sets in general?
So with sets, warm-up sets,
yep,
I always start with the warm-up of the exercise I'm about to do when I start training.
Yep.
Because the best way to warm those muscles up is using the ones you're literally using on that exercise.
Yep.
So let's say, for example, if I'm doing a pull-up and I start trying to warm up my biceps first, there's not really much point because I'm using a lot of the back muscles.
Has to be relevant to what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more relevant to warming up on a pull-up than doing a pull-up.
Yeah.
But you just do it with less weight. So you can take, wrap a band around your leg. You can do it on the assisted machine.
Yeah.
And as I do it as like an 8-6-4. So I do 8 reps of a low sort of RPE.
Yeah.
And then I go 6 reps, slightly higher.
Yeah.
4 reps, slightly higher. And then I get to my working weight, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And then after that,
you have your working sets. So that's why a lot of people like throw these terms around. So your warm-up sets is literally what it says on the tin, and it's there to move that muscle, get some blood flow into it before you're about to really push it. And obviously your working sets, they're the ones obviously you mainly focus on for your logbook and everything that you're following. And you mentioned in there RPE.
Yeah.
A lot of people out there may not know what that means. Obviously, you and I do.
Yeah.
So let's explain that one just quickly.
So RPE is rate of perceived exertion. That's what it stands for, and it's basically a way of objectively measuring how much exertion that muscle or that movement is. So let's say, for example, it's 1 to 10. So if I'm at an RPE 8. I've got 2 reps until I fail on that movement.
Yeah.
If I'm at an RPE 6, I've got 4 reps until the end of that movement when I'm failing it. Yeah. So and
I always ask my clients, like after a set, and I'm like, oh no, you've got more in the tank. I'm like, how was that weight feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? And they're like, they can see I can see the thought. They're like, I'm like, okay, right. This can change. And it's a really helpful, quite a simple way to think about things as well, to not overcomplicate it. It's like, generally, how is that feeling? How's it moving? How are you, like, how's the heart rate feeling? Do we need to take a little bit more recovery? Like, it is quite useful to use.
Yeah. But I will say it brings me on to a useful point, which is some people misinterpret how hard they're actually training, if that makes sense. So, for example, that's why we have a good idea of knowing how many they've got left. Because although something hurts and you're like, oh God, I really want to put this down. I can't do this anymore. Yeah. But we're looking at the rep speed and it's exactly the same. It's like, no, you've got loads left, buddy. You've got to keep going.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge thing to highlight is this will tell you far quicker. Like, we're looking at what your body's doing. That, like, obviously, yes, your facial expressions, but don't fake them for anyone out there because we see you. It's your body's still going. It can still go. And what up here feels like you push past that, then we're training.
Yeah.
Like, that's when we're going places.
That's the thing. As you get towards the last 5 reps of the set, when you're pushing as hard as you possibly can, that's when the rep will slow down.
Yeah.
on the,
and
on
that's
the content
okay.
track. Yes, that's what you want.
Like,
that is
I say so many, they panic when a rep slows down. I'm like, no, we can finish it. Keep going. I don't care if it takes 5 years. Keep going, because obviously then we don't, that's when you can start to see how that failure is going to creep in. And obviously we don't necessarily always need to be training failure, but we want intensity.
Yeah.
So by gauging that speed of how that rep's moving is going to give us a really good idea of that, or yourself if you're training.
Absolutely. And an RPE is best used when you've actually trained to failure on everything, on all your muscle groups, and all of the exercises, because it's going to feel slightly different on each one. So until you've actually done it, you're not going to know how many you have left.
And that's going to take time, and that's what we're always finding out. And I always find it out whenever I have a session with John. And I think people forget, as much as we want to sort of butcher people and push them through their limits, we're still learning about what our limits are as well. But that's what we strive for in most sessions. And it's really working, especially when you're working in phases, which I guess comes on nicely to then talk about deloads. And when you're on, you're working for, I don't know, let's say 6 to 8 weeks is probably about general sort of phase. And I think, but we want to be training with intensity that whole time. You want to be seeing that progress, and sometimes you get to a point you pushed and things are feeling a bit fatigued and that's where it can come in. And I guess, how would you run your phases? Kind of, it's what else would you want to notice about whether it's a client or yourself?
So in terms of deloading, or when it's appropriate, I would go by symptoms as opposed by time.
Yes.
Because
it can vary.
You could literally go, I've been 8 weeks and I haven't deloaded. Time to deload.
Yeah,
it doesn't really give you the benefit unless you've got to that phase of overreaching, which is just before overtraining.
Yes.
And that's where you get the super compensation after the deload, when you're fully recovered, all that accumulated fatigue has actually worn off. Yeah. Which is the whole point of the deload in the first place.
And the time can give us a gauge, but I like that you've said that it's not everything, because it's not. I think I went through a 12 to 15 week phase, and John was like, keep going.
Yeah.
So, but, and I've just done 11 weeks, and it's gauging, like you say, those symptoms. So, let's make a list. What would you look out for? So to explain a deload, it's where we back off of everything, where we just move. You might take the whole week off to rest and recover, but your focus is recovery. So then when you come back, you're ready to go and then progress again.
Exactly. So with deloading, it's just reducing the intensity, the volume, over anywhere between, it can literally be 4 days or up to 2 weeks, depending on how overtrained you are, which will depend on person to person. And in terms of symptoms, when it's like you're trying to lift the weight, still the same, but it just feels really slow, a lot harder, not really getting anywhere. You're feeling really tired, sleep
really
quality
annoying
goes down.
sessions.
Yeah, it's just frustrating. And it's almost like that motivation to train goes down, because you just generally through your whole body feel tired.
Absolutely knackered.
Yeah.
Could say worse, but and you notice that. But equally to say, and I saw a really, really good reel, is it's not always necessary to deload if you're not working at a great intensity.
No.
Be real with yourself. And I see, so many people I train, and I'm like, but do you train? And to how we would think about it, and everyone's training and their purpose is very different. It's not always into the same goals that we strive for. But, and it's sometimes we can take even just an extra day's rest might be enough for someone to actually feel a little bit more recovered. It's not always necessary to take massive long, some people it's a week, some people it's a whole week off, some people it's just a couple of days that they need to take off training. And it doesn't mean you're not making progress. In fact, it makes progress happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is something that is there for a purpose.
Yeah, it's sometimes you have acute sort of stress or fatigue that's just there. You just want to be in and out of it pretty quickly. But it's when it's obviously accumulated over this period of time where it's like, okay, this has happened for a few weeks now.
Yeah.
It's time to take a step back. That's when you have the big deload.
Yeah.
But recovery sessions, a couple of days off here and there when it's needed.
Yeah. It's not just an excuse to be like, I'm just going to have a day off. Even though sometimes you might feel like that.
Yeah.
I always say if we did everything based on how we feel, we'd get nothing done.
Exactly.
If I didn't do a session for every time I felt tired, I don't think I'd have the same progress as I do now. And all these techniques, I think, have been so important to highlight, because I think a lot of people don't understand like these little nitty gritty parts. And I think as coaches, and it's really great to have that PT to be able to, for you to understand, or an online coach, or however way you want to do it. Because, and another reason why, if you're like, say with a coach online, the more detail you give about training, the more they'll understand whether it's right for these things to come into play. Like, if you're like, yeah, training's good, keep going then.
Yeah, well, good how? Explain to me what's going on.
And it's understanding those specifics, like, are we fatigued? Like, if it's, hormone related, tell them. Like, if you're noticing it in training, like, even if you've got like anything illness as well, like that's also another gauge to understand of how we push training and where we're at in those phases. And so it's the communication more than anything.
It is. I've always preached this to every one of my clients before they sign up. Feedback is so important because I'm not with them 24 hours of the day.
So that's what they pay you for. Knowledge. The more knowledge you give me, the more knowledge I can give back.
Exactly. From their feedback, I can make adjustments that are relevant. And then the more questions they ask as well about why are we doing this? Oh, how comes we're doing this? Why have you put this here?
All of these questions.
And I answer it. The more they understand, the better they're going to do, because they have a better concept of why this is happening and why it's structured the way it is.
And then obviously when you're in like person with someone, it's so much fun because and we can explain all of these techniques and understanding of rep ranges and all of these questions, like ask away, like we love it. I said on the previous pod with Chris as well, it's so interesting when people ask you those questions and you can like nerd out on it. And obviously I guess the last thing to sort of come to with a lot of these techniques we've spoke about so much is obviously in your sets, you've got cluster sets, you've got paused reps, like all of these really specific things, but it's where we can challenge things. You've got giant sets, which John absolutely loves, and you end up doing hundreds and hundreds of lunges around the gym floor. And again, they're a tool.
Yes, every single intensity technique or set type is a tool in a toolbox which does a job.
Intensify.
Exactly. A lot of it is just a way of extending a set out. So, for example, a cluster set is where you have like let's say you pick an 8 rep max weight, right?
Yeah.
And then you do that for 4 reps, 10-second rest, 4 reps, 10-second rest, and then the last little round, you go everything you've got until you've got no more. So what you would get for 8, you've just got for like 10 or 12 reps.
Yeah. Which
is progression.
And it's another way to really intensify and push things. And obviously cluster sets can vary in so many different ways. Like you can do more reps and again, it can vary if you're going into specifics, and each coach will have their way of doing that, but more or less it's doing the same thing. But it's essentially very few close back-to-back sets with very little rest. And yes, you can do it.
Yes, you can.
You do have to hype yourself up a little bit more for it. But other than that, and it's really, really useful. So obviously then you've got paused reps. So essentially, to explain that, if you're doing, we'll go for dumbbell chest press, you've got that pause at the bottom where the stretch is happening most, and then you've got to push up. You've got to find that power from somewhere, and it's got to go.
Yeah, I would argue that most reps should have a slight pause in the stretch position anyway. That is the most important part of the rep.
Yeah.
So if you're bouncing it, I'm talking to you, that's right. You're bouncing it at the bottom.
You know who you're
selling yourself short, because you could be getting so much more from just stopping that momentum, slight stretch, and then come up.
Yeah.
The benefit is gonna exceed the ego, so to speak, of the load on the bar, dumbbell or machine, whatever it is.
Yeah. Oh, hugely. And then obviously if you're purposefully doing pause sets, that pause is just going to be a little bit longer and a little bit tougher. So again, another tool to use within that. Then giant sets. They they don't appear, or they shouldn't appear too often in a session. Others might disagree. But again, there is no one size fits all with that. And I see so many people, like, we have those higher rep ranges, and I see so many people like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like,
it's all these set types are good, but you have to use them in moderation for specific things that you want to grow or get better in a shorter space of time.
Because if you push more volume on a muscle group,
overall recovery is going to be obviously altered. So doing it appropriately, specifically for something, because if you've done like giant sets, cluster sets, drop sets, supersets for every single muscle, every session, you would literally have like 3 weeks of good training and then time for a deload.
yeah. Which obviously isn't optimal because we want to give it the time to push for that growth. And all of these are just really interesting to come to us. And I think it's confusing, like when people, which is why people, I guess, come to us for programs and stuff. Like, and again, another reason to say there is no one size fits all. There is no one perfect program. Everyone will have different techniques, but sometimes it does take a while to get used to what you like as well. Like a coach might give you a program and you might absolutely hate it. Equally, that doesn't mean you just ditch them. It means you give them the communication to understand so they can help go a bit closer to their needs, because they're not going to program you what they do, but there might be training techniques that they do that is really useful that they think would be great for your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been times with some of my clients where there might be a more effective approach, so to speak, but if somebody's output is more on an exercise they enjoy, that exercise that's less effective actually becomes more effective for them, because that progressive overload thing that obviously we spoke about before is then being implemented, which is one of the most important parts of progressing during your training.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last point I want to highlight, compound lift to accessory work.
Yep.
Both necessary.
Absolutely.
And I know so many people who are like, compounds only. I'm like, but if you don't do any accessory work, nothing's going to be supported. And it's vital.
Yeah. So with compound lifts, it's what I call your bread and butter movements. This is something that's going to give you a good foundational amount of strength that will cross over onto lots of different exercises and also will get you a lot of growth in a lot of areas.
Yes.
But then you need to be a bit specific afterwards with all these smaller isolation movements, which again, you can utilize for areas that you want to try and prioritize a little bit more.
And to explain quickly, like compound lifts are what we talk about, the stuff that uses more than one muscle group, to push for a lift in whatever.
It's where multiple joints are moving at the same time to complete a lift, i.e. a squat, a deadlift, a bench press, a pull-up, things like that. Whereas an isolation movement would be like a dumbbell preacher curl or let's take a tricep extension or anything where just one joint.
And obviously other things might come into play, like your core is still going to work. Like we're not completely isolating, because your body's going to be still moving and stabilizing and all of those things as well. But obviously we're focusing on those little more muscle groups that are just supporting everything around those joints, around that growth. And also, I guess, aesthetically as well. Like you don't just want to focus on the big stuff.
No, absolutely not. And it's just biasing an area. That's all it literally is. You can't eliminate an area completely from moving. But for example,
we need
take
our body.
that dumbbell press, for example. You can minimize the movement and engagement of the front delt. But you're never going to eliminate it, because if it wasn't there, you would not be lifting it anyway.
It wouldn't be going anywhere. And it's really been interesting, like, talking about all of these topics and having, understanding how we push for muscle growth and what we want to push for in terms of our goals. And obviously today we haven't spoke about it in line with nutrition, and we could go on in a whole nother ramble.
Big topic.
In line with training to push for muscle growth.
Yes.
But obviously we are we've been talking today about that stimulation that we need to push for in training, to actually understand how we're going to get the most out of our muscles.
Yeah.
More than anything else.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I've really enjoyed that. It was really good nerding out. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Obviously, I will pop all of Charlie's details on this vid on YouTube, as well as obviously in the comments and stuff, and on my Spotify. So obviously, if you have any questions on anything that we've spoken about, because we have gone into quite a lot of detail, don't ever hesitate to ask. And obviously, if you ever see us on the gym floor, if you are listening from PAG and you see it on there, then just come and ask us, and we'd be more than happy to answer. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me. It's been so good. Yes, I've loved it.
Awesome.
And I shall see you on the next pod.
Yeah.
Everyone, Supergirl here, and I am a super fan of SMJ Media Group. They provide support for local businesses, charities and events, and of course create fun content for all of you. If you enjoy our content and would like to help support us, please go to buymeacoffee.com/SMJ Media Group and buy us a coffee.